I was giving originally the topic of how should we look at essentially what is loosely called social media, which I don't want to frame it in that way. I'd not like to frame it as social media versus media. I really like to frame it as different technologies of reaching what we would like to say to the people. And this is, if you look at it this way, you have print media, you have electronic media, which is really television, and you have today digital media. These are the three media segments which I can think of as a technology division, because that really defines how this kinds of three media reach us in different ways, and what are the changes that have taken place in the media landscape and what has not changed. And I think both are important. Before we go into the content of media, which is what is it that we expect from media, what is supposed to be the role of media in societies, and how in each of these technological changes that have taken place, how are we able to actually see the delivery of those goals? And I'm saying the purpose of media, in fact, of mass media, and all these are mass media. The purpose of mass media is not to speak power to the people. What the power, the government, rich, moneyed class, of which now the top 10 probably have as much money as the bottom in terms of wealth, not as in terms of income, probably as 50% of the people of this country. Now, this is not the purpose of the kind of media we are talking about. We are talking about media which is to inform the people of what's happening in the country. Of course, that brings up the question of what is news. Because after all, news is something we select. Every time we write, we have to decide what we think is important. And of course, different people will have different views on that. So ultimately, what stays in the long run, what people remember, are exactly the kind of thing, for instance, Narendran did. That you are exposing things, it changes society. It makes an impact on society. And it makes us, therefore, change the correlation of power in society. Now, that is journalism in the true sense of the word, irrespective whether it is digital media, or it's print media, or it's electronic media. So the question really is for us to think about that how in the modern world, how does this happen? And what are the drivers of media itself? Media takes place in the context of, as you have talked about, context of economic power. Economic power, of course, is, if you take, for instance, the Indian economy from the British Raj to what we have now, then as those economists who look at this data have said, we have got from basically British Raj, we have company Raj, we have now got to billionaire Raj. That means, and these are not Indians alone, these are basically people who have looked at simply distribution of income and distribution of wealth and said, how has it changed over a period of time? And yes, after we kicked out the British, it did show that the distribution of wealth in the country changed. When we became independent, I was born at that time, the Indian life expectancy was 31 years. 31 years means large number of children died. It's an average figure. So people, once you survive a certain age, then you can really live fairly to an advanced age. the maximum death takes place or used to take place between 0 to 5 years. That's when little kids died. And we were able to address that. All the vaccination programs, the mother's health, all the things that we did. However weak it might have been in different areas, not as much as we would like it to be, but it made a huge difference. That child mortality, infant mortality reduced. But malnutrition is still there. We are on the malnutrition list, we are low down. We are what is called, we are on par with sub-Saharan Africa, okay, which is thought to be the areas where there are wars, so there's a mass scale starvation and wasting of children over there. So that is a part of what we have seemed to have not addressed the problem. And in spite of the country, what was it, the economic terms on per capita, what is called the PPP terms, you can have wealth per cap, if you decide in purchasing power parity, how much you can $1 buys in India and in the US, you can index that, then you get in size of the economy in purchasing power parity terms. One probably $5 in US buys one egg. India $1 probably buys maybe 3 eggs. Okay, so the purchasing power parity, if you take, Indian economy is the third largest in the world. If you take dollar economy, is the fifth largest in the world. But the point is not that. The point is who has got this wealth. Okay, there is money. Who has got this wealth? And that's where the distribution of income we are talking about comes in, that we are seeing India is now 158th in the 59th in the Press Freedom Index, but India's index of child health, child mortality, wasting is also very low. So this is the problem that we have, the background which we are talking about, what does a journalist do, and particularly what the organizers asked me to do is to talk about social media, which is what I'm calling as digital media. So I have to go back to essentially what is the change that technology brings to us. If you take mass media itself, because I'm the Press Institute, so we basically press was the foundation of mass media. So when you talk of mass media, newspapers and mass media are relatively new phenomena. They didn't exist earlier. There was no way of communicating what was happening to the people. And the printing press is the one which creates literacy first, because before that there was no literacy. Okay, few people could read and write, but that's about it. The printing press brings or creates literacy in the world. India much later, but in the world, it creates literacy, and that then creates the possibility of newspaper-like organizations coming up and books coming up. It takes some time. Printing press, 15th, 16th century, but newspapers is really 19th century. You can talk about printing press, newspapers coming in, and newspapers when it came in, what is called the penny press in the US, for example, was basically somebody got the bright idea to take advertisements and then sell the paper at below cost, because he was going to fund it from advertisers. And then because the number went up, he got more advertisements. So his business model was the first, which, if you remember, Times of India followed that in the end of 20th century, when they were selling paper at below cost price. We could get more money by selling it to the Raddiwala than it cost us to pay cost us to pay for the paper. So that was the same model. But the point again is advertising revenue has been the lifeblood of the press from the beginning. So let's not think this is something new. This has been always there. So what does that mean? And I'm going to quote Mr. Jain. Two Jains are their brothers. One of them was the chairman of the, I think Vineet Jain, was the chairman of Times of India, who actually, in a very frank interview to a foreign publication, he said, we are not in the business of news, we are in the business of advertisements. So therefore, that is our basic model, that we are in the advertising business to sell advertisements, meaning sell to the advertisers. We need an audience. For that audience, we do news. So that is from the beginning. That's not something that he was saying which is unknown. It is quite well known that basically the revenue model of news organization is essentially advertisement, and the advertising department holds much more power than actually the editorial department. So those are all part of the story which is known, but he said it crudely, so that was the problem. Saying it sophisticatedly, as the English specialize in, then was be okay. But if you say this crudely, as a good Banya businessman from Rajasthan, then you sort of get caught out. Okay, so that was the basic business model which Times of India openly said, and that is the basic business model of newspapers, of television as well. So let's not think that we are talking about content. The content, of course, they have to sell the paper. They need good journalism to sell the paper, but not such that it contradicts the objective of buying advertisements, giving advertisements. If we go on that line, then we will understand that the purpose of media is really to make money for its owners. In simple terms, this is what they have to do. For that, you need stars meaning reporters. You need star reporters who can sell through news, who can sell the paper. And of course, then you have to also take into account what the owners of advertising, those who give advertisements, what they want. And again, I'm coming to Times of India is a very good example that they said that, we don't want to talk about poverty and depress buyers. People who buy, if they get depressed, they won't go and buy stuff. Okay? So give good news. You must give positive news in the paper, because that will induce the middle class to go and buy. If you depress them, they'll think, okay, the economy is sinking, this is happening, they won't go out and buy. So negative stories, no. Only positive stories to be written. So as an example, and Sainath gives this example, and I heard this from him long back, that when the farmer suicides were taking place, the whole of Maharashtra, there was one reporter who was covering the peasantry, basically Sainath, and there are 40 reporters who covered the fashion beat, okay, because fashion sells. So this is the logic of all this. Now, when you talk about television and you talk about social media or digital media, whichever way you want to place it, the point is that logic hasn't changed, because ultimately it is not we who make the content who gets the money. It's Google and Facebook. Let's be very clear that the biggest media companies in the world today are not the news organizations, not the television organizations, but it's Google and Facebook. Maybe earlier I would have said Twitter, now X. But by far the highest amount of revenue from advertisements come to Google and to Facebook, and news organizations of all kinds today are not getting ad revenue. Because if I want to know something, I go to Google, I search for it, I read the news there itself, I'm only interested in 3-4 lines, I'm done. So increasingly, what is happening is that the newspapers then have the problem, how do they survive? Now, I'm not going to give solutions here, that's not my task. My task was digital media, so I'll have to come back to that. So I'm going to talk about, let's look at the media economics as far as social media or digital media is concerned. A platform like NewsClick, for example. By the way, I must correct a couple of things about my arrest and so on. I was arrested under UAPA and I have got bail. Not allowed to discuss my case, so I won't. The ED raided me in 2021, I think, more than 2 years, 2.5 years back, and they stayed a number of days in my house because they were trying to download my data from Google, Gmail, and it took a long time. Okay, because I don't delete my mails. So they were caught on that. They still haven't given up. I have some protection from the court on that as well. I cannot be arrested by ED, but they can always arrest me filing another charge sheet, another ECIR. So we have to take for granted that if the government of the day wants to put you in jail, they can. And then it's a long battle. Okay, I was lucky. I was out in 7.5 months. There are people who have been there 4 years, 3 years. Sai Baba, his case he was declared innocent after 10 years. And that's the nature of PMLA and UAPA, that bail is not the normal, is exception, jail is the rule. So that is in nutshell, that is the principle on which these two laws operate. And then, of course, you have to fight it. And if you're lucky, you may get out earlier. And it doesn't mean that you can't be put in again. So I take for granted the power of the state to punish people. If they don't like you, they can put you in. And that happened during emergency long back. And it's happening in different ways even today. The fact that most of these cases do not lead to proof being offered in court which leads to conviction is another matter. But that's not my topic today, so I'm not getting into that. So the question is, we have to accept the fact that if the government wants to control the media, then they can assert certain kind of control. So what is the 3 kinds of control they can all do? One is simply the danda, the penal provisions that they can exercise, FIRs, UAPA, PMLA, the various other laws as well, So those laws, earlier there was sedition, now sedition is not there, but it's been wrapped into UAPA or something else. So the provision still stays in a different garb. So all of this means the state can use directly the coercive instrument of the state, of power. The second is, of course, money. As you know, the regional papers are much more dependent on government ads. So if the government ads are stopped, their economy of the paper becomes takes a big hit. So that is there. The third, of course, is coercing the media owners to say that you shall not do the following things. You will not give space to the opposition parties. You will not carry critical news. And whatever we say, you have to foreground it. If you have a debate, you must have at least 3 people from BJP over there. One will be BJP, one will be independent, one will be ABVP, and so on. One will be RSS. So you can have different hats, but 2 to 3 people must be on one side. So all of this, of course, dutifully, lot of the media owners will do. Some will not. And then, of course, they face the music. NDTV is an example of that, who tried to do journalism, and therefore finally they had to give up. So all these things are the instruments that exist. What happens if now digital platforms come up? Because digital platforms do not, or in that sense, they are not ones who need a license from the government. You see, if you go into, for example, a television media. Television needs license. So that license is something which the government can decide whether to give or not give. And even if it gives a license, if they don't like you, then there are technical instruments with which you can disturb the feed that goes up the satellite, and therefore you can actually hamper the what the channel is doing. I will not go into details of this, but those who know when some specific expose of Mr. Modi was done, the ABP's the broadcast was disturbed, and finally the two reporters who did it both had to leave ABP. So this is the way that can also be done. Okay, not a very clean way of doing it, but it can be done to pressurize the owners of big channels to toe the line. And what happens to digital media is the key issue, because digital media, unfortunately for them, for not only in India but elsewhere, digital media is difficult to control because the connection to the internet is not centralized. In China it is. They have to go through the Great Firewall of China, as it is called. India it is not. It goes to various routes, and therefore it's very difficult to control like China does the Great Firewall. You block n number of things gets blocked. Very difficult to do it here. And therefore what they wanted to do is to operate through Google and Facebook. You ask Google and Facebook to do certain things, they were willing to do it. In fact, Facebook's record of this is very clear what they were doing. And even today, they do let all kinds of vicious propaganda come onto their platform. But they come under pressure elsewhere. They come under regulatory pressure because they're a US company. So they can be asked, how did you allow this? What are your checks? What are your checks and balances? How do you monitor Indian posts which are coming up or videos which are coming up? Do you have enough people who know Indian languages? All these questions are being asked in lots of places. And therefore the case which has come up over there, that these are two very big monopolies, Facebook and Google. Amazon is there for a different reason. They need to be regulated, and there are regulatory pressures building up the United States. They need too big, and therefore under anti-monopoly laws which still exist in the United States, they should be broken up. This is the pressure that is coming up. So therefore they are unwilling to play the ball that the government wants. Basically fine-tuned, selective throttling of main voices which have now become popular. And all of us know when it comes to digital platforms, this election was fought really at two levels. One is what came in what is called the mainstream media, which is television, newspapers, the meetings that were held, what speakers, opposition speakers campaigned, some of it was carried, not that entire part of it was carried, but some of it was carried. So Mr. Modi was covered much more. The BJP got, if they got 50, 60, 70% of the coverage, others did get 30%, which was a bit of a change from earlier times. Why was that so? Because for the first time, the major voices that people were listening to were not the mainstream media. They were really looking at digital platforms. They were looking at not just Dhruv Rathi, Abhisar, Ravish, all these names which you are familiar with. Of course, people listen to them. But along with that, huge number of videos made by people whom we don't know who they are, funny, music, creativity of the people at a very high level. All of that percolated the media. Let's be very clear. percolated the social media, digital media. Let's be very clear. It was not consciously led by opposition parties. It was led by the people who were fed up with what was happening, and they decided their voice must be heard. And here I must say that it showed to us, which I have been arguing for quite some time, that they might have money power, they might have the danda, they have the state with them. What they don't have is creativity. What they lack is empathy, empathy with people, humanity, knowing what is the cause of sorrow in people, to be able to empathize with that, to be able to tell them that we are with you. Okay, and what they lack most of all is a sense of humor. Okay, that they, if you remember, of course, this is not my generation, not your generation. Most of you are well below my generation. I'm 77 years old, so pretty old. So we had this great film. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, The Great Dictator, Charlie Chaplin. And there, the way he makes fun of Hitler, that is something which we cannot forget. I think that was more effective than any of the speeches the people opposing Hitler would have done. So that is the instrument that we have. We have creativity, we have empathy with the people, and we have the ability to laugh at our leaders. And laughing at your leaders is one great advantage. If you speak the truth while you are laughing at the leaders, then you remember that old story which was there, the emperor has no clothes. So that is something which becomes apparent to the people. And I think in this election, we had a critical mass in which this became the major form of public resistance. Yes, the opposition parties had to do their job. They had to organize. They had to reach the people. They had to put up candidates. They had to get the voters. All that they had to do. But the campaigning, a large part of the campaigning came this time from digital platforms. So what is the risk now we have? The risk is that, as you know, there is a broadcasting bill which is now in the offing that will amend the original broadcasting bill, I think in 1990s or something. It will amend that for now bringing under its orbit the digital media as well. So individuals who earlier did not need to be regulated, if they exceed a certain number, they could be regulated by the government. So they might say, if you are above a certain number, then anything you publish on social media, you have to get prior clearance. Or whether you can do these things or not, we will give you clearance. So how they will do it, I really have no idea, because social media is not easy to control. It's a huge number of people on it. Whom will you control? How will you control? When you can't even run your government, when you can't run an examination, when you can't provide the services you are supposed to do, when your bridges after building collapse, okay? All of this is happening. You are now trying to micromanage something which doesn't need management. So this, of course, there are laws. If somebody violates the law of the land, and there are various laws, including laws regarding privacy, laws regarding libel, the various laws there. But to produce a new set of regulatory structures for digital platform, which actually has not succeeded anywhere, I think is an act of stupidity. Let me put it very bluntly. I think an act of stupidity because to control the huge number of people today on digital platforms is like King Canute tried to ask the ocean to go back. The ocean had to listen to him. So we are in that kind of mode where there is a belief that we can do this if we try hard enough. My submission is that, of course, it needs to be fought. It needs to be fought by all media people. This is not a matter of social media alone. It ultimately means all of us. So we have to fight this. How we'll fight this, we can only do once we know what is the bill. The bill, the first version was criticized. That was open. It was criticized. The current version, there are only a few numbered copies which have been given. They have been given to only large, I will call trade organizations, so they call themselves media organizations. They have not been shared with, for instance, Digipub, which is the platform for digital organizations. They have not been given a copy. They have not been included in the discussions. I don't think any of the journalist organizations have a copy of it. Selected people have been given copies, and they're numbered copies. So if anybody leaks it out, they will know what the source is. So this is where it is at the moment, that we seem to be entering an age where this government is going to try and control digital platforms, believing that is the one which led to damage in their elections, and that is the one which is for them a point of resistance. That this is the kind of resistance which is distributed, bringing different kinds of people, and that needs to be stopped. I'll end, because you've called me as founder, NewsClick, and so on, so I'll end a little bit of why did I start NewsClick. See, when I started NewsClick, I believed that digital platforms would come in. At that time, 2009, people thought Facebook and YouTube was enough. Most of the activists, socially conscious people, they thought that is enough, that we will do things on Facebook, we'll do things on YouTube, and that is enough for us to intervene. We don't need to do anything else. And I was saying, no, that's not true. You need to have an organized presence in this, because the other side is also going to use this. And you know that the BJP had a huge lead over all other political parties when it comes to use of digital platforms. They did it very effectively. And this time that it didn't work, not because the opposition got savvy, but because the people resisted. So I was saying that we need to create pro-people platforms. It doesn't require too much cost, which can be done cheaply using essentially prosumer cameras. You don't need high-end machines for this. You can use high-end, in fact, we used to use gaming laptops, which are relatively cheaper, but in computational terms very powerful for doing graphic work. So I said we could actually don't have to get 4 lakh, 5 lakh machines. These are the things which will work for you. So this, people thought that I was just at my personal fad. And I was saying we need to do this, because without this we'll not be able to intervene with the section today who no longer reads newspapers, who no longer even sees television, who get their entire news from the internet. So if you want to approach that, that's my son's generation. As I said, he's 40 years old. If they have stopped papers and they don't look at television, it's a huge demography which we have to address, because that's the future of our society. So therefore we need to intervene for doing two things. One is that low-cost platforms are possible. And that now everybody understands, but it's taken a long time. That low-cost platforms are possible and the quality can be relatively high. It doesn't need to be low. The second is that you need to bring those voices in, which today big media does not cover. And that's why I gave you the story of what the big media covers and why it doesn't cover the farmers. And this is something that I have observed for the last 30, 40 years. Whenever the workers or the peasantry farmers march in the cities, the newspaper headline will be traffic jams. Okay, why? It's appealing to the middle class. See, these fellows, they're not letting you go and drive to your office. See, all this, how bad they are. But none of the papers actually go and interview the farmers or the workers. Why are you marching? Why have you come from different parts of India to demonstrate in Delhi? This is not a question that would be ever posed in the newspaper. The question will be, they came and they made us, the ones who drive cars, made it so inconvenient for us. So the viewpoint is that of the person in the car, not the thousands and lakhs of people who are marching. Farmers have a little more sympathy because a lot of urban India also has rural roots. They also identify partly with the farmers. So therefore, they got a little better press. But even there, the major part of the media was really the digital media like us, and also what they created themselves. So all of that shows, yes, there is a potential. There is a potential of using this media for changing society for the better. It will not happen if we do not organize ourselves, if it is not an organized, well thought out intervention. And what is it that we can do? Okay, NewsClick may or may not be shut down is a different matter. But our experience is there, and we should be able to share it with everybody. How do you build small media organizations, and how do you do it successfully? How much does it cost? What should you do? Then to build, not only build them, but also make possible tools which are there, which people may not know about. So cheap tools which do the job as much as any high-end tools you buy in the market. So we can make those popular, and that connects me to the other hat that I wear, the free software movement. Free software movement has always shown that for every high-end editing video tool that you can talk about, there are similar tools available in the free software arena. And in the software domain today, in fact, free software dominates over what is called copyrighted software. Microsoft runs its Windows, all right, still, which is copyrighted, but all the servers run on Linux. In fact, it's their Microsoft Windows that collapsed. The backend Linux servers did not collapse. What is called the Azure cloud that runs on Linux. So yes, there are other possibilities that exist. How do you bring all of it together? And that's where organizations have to intervene. This will not happen by itself. It will not happen by individuals like me taking some initiative and doing something. It's organizations which have to think, what is the future of media? And particularly the press clubs. They have been much more vocal and active in the issue of press freedom than, for instance, the press owners associations. So that, how do you marry technology, journalism, and the vision of the future? This is the challenge. It's not an easy one, but then, fighting injustice, fighting wealth, fighting powerful in society has never been easy. But let's put it this way, it has also never been difficult because, okay, few of us may pay some price, but you are, as I'm going to end poetically, though my literature is not my strong point, but Shelley had written that ye are many, they are few. And that is what we have to carry with us, that we are many, they are few. And that's where our strength lies. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to end with this.